Let's shift our focus to politics and elections now. In just over 12 hours from now, Sri Lanka will hold a pivotal presidential election. And this will be the first poll since the island nation plunged into an economic crisis. While there are record 38 candidates in the race, there is no clear favourite. Voting in Sri Lanka will begin tomorrow at 7 a.m. local time and conclude by 4 p.m. local time, and counting will begin shortly after. Results are expected by late Sunday.
What you see right behind me is the Independence Square of Colombo. It has been 76 years since Sri Lanka gained independence in 1948. However, as of right now, people feel trapped now more than ever. A majority of them feel that high costs of living coupled with unbearable taxes is making life extremely difficult here in Sri Lanka. That is why 17 million voters will be heading to the polls tomorrow, with a majority of them feeling that Sri Lanka needs to change, especially when it comes to taxes and costs of living. 38 candidates vying for one spot. Sri Lanka decides this weekend. Reporting for WION World is one from Colombo, I'm Dasani Athauta.
As Sri Lanka prepares for its presidential election on September 21st, the economy is at the forefront of voters' concerns following the nation's severe economic crisis a few years back. This next report talks about the challenges ahead for the new government and what impact it could have on the citizens of the island nation.
Sri Lanka's economy is slowly recovering after the country faced a sovereign default in April 2022. That crisis was driven by dwindling foreign exchange reserves and public debt exceeding $83 billion. This crisis led to soaring inflation peaking near 70% and widespread unrest that ultimately ousted ex-president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Under interim President Ranil Wickremesinghe, Sri Lanka secured a $2.9 billion IMF bailout in 2023. That's the 17th bailout in the country's history. Since then, the economy has shown signs of recovery, marked by decreasing inflation, stabilizing borrowing costs, and a revitalized tourism sector. However, challenges remain. Poverty levels have doubled since 2019, with over 25% of the population living below the poverty line. The country also faces one of the highest interest payments to government revenue ratios globally, and a grace period on bilateral loan repayments will end in 2028. The incoming president must navigate these economic hurdles while maintaining the momentum of ongoing structural reforms and ensuring fiscal discipline. The recent shift in governance has led to the implementation of over 70 new laws focused on anti-corruption and public debt management. However, any rollback on these reforms could jeopardize Sri Lanka's access to crucial IMF funds. Ultimately, the election outcome will significantly influence economic policies that impact daily life for Sri Lankans. A government that prioritizes sustained reform and fiscal responsibility is essential for stabilizing the economy and improving living conditions for the populace. The new leader's approach to managing Sri Lanka's complex geopolitical relationships, particularly with India and China, will also play a critical role in shaping the country's economic trajectory. Business Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And to take this conversation further, we are being joined by Bhavani Fonseca from Colombo, Sri Lanka. Bhavani is a lawyer and senior researcher at the Center for Policy Alternatives. Welcome to the broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Fonseca.
Thank you.
Every time we talk about the presidential elections in Sri Lanka, we keep going back to the 2022 chaos, if I can call it, in a dark chapter in the country's history. How much of what happened in the last 2 years sticks with the voters, and how much of that will we see on Saturday?
So I think the 2022 economic crisis and the subsequent people's protest is very much a recent memory for many Sri Lankans, and this whole economic recovery phase is going to be central in terms of decision making for many who go to vote tomorrow. So it's in a way a referendum of the present government and the present president's policies and how he has navigated the last 2 years. And I think economy is going to be the key deciding factor for many as to how the stability can continue.
Right. Ms. Fonseca, we have been speaking to a lot of people, a lot of voters in Colombo. One of them said a very interesting thing yesterday. She said, and I'm quoting her, "None of the mainstream political parties are willing to continue the objectives of the protests we saw in 2022. What do you make of these old horses running in this election?"
Well, I think there is a section of society, and not just in Colombo, outside as well, who feel that the call for a system change, which was very articulated and very strong in 2022, has not been reflected in the last 2 years. And a lot of the candidates don't talk about it. But that said, I think there are two opposition candidates who are leading in the campaign who speak to some of the concerns the protesters raised in terms of promising abolishing the executive presidency, to addressing corruption. There is that, but there is also concern that, you're seeing a lot of the old faces, and will they be able to really deliver? So lots of questions among the voters. But I think it's also very important to understand the dynamics in the country, not just in Colombo, but rest of the country as well.
Right, you make a very fair point. You spoke about the old faces. Let's talk about the new face, Namal Rajapaksa. Why is he running?
Well, Namal Rajapaksa is, I wouldn't say a new face. He's been in politics for a couple of years now. He comes from a family that has been in politics. His father and his uncle were both president. And if anyone remembers, his uncle was at the helm when the economic crisis hit and had to flee the country in response to the massive protests. Namal Rajapaksa has been in that government, so he's not a new face. He's the youngest candidate in this campaign, and I think in that people look to him as what is the plan for the next election. I don't think anyone expects him to win this time, but it's basically continuing the Rajapaksa name and continue to keep the SLPP, the political party, relevant in the present political climate.
Right. He seems to be playing the long game, if I can say that. Ms. Fonseca, it was back in 1960 that Sri Lanka gave the world's first female president. What happened this time? Not only are the mainstream parties not fielded a single female president, it's a record number 38 presidential candidates and none of them are women. What happened?
That's a good question, and women's participation in politics in Sri Lanka is really very disappointing, considering the fact that we did have a woman prime minister and a woman president. And that's quite telling in terms of society. But I have to also make a note here that we may not have a presidential candidate in terms of a woman, but women have played a critical role in this campaign. And I think at least the leading candidates have very powerful, strong women in those campaigns, and they've played a key role in the last few weeks. So it's a question to ask in terms of why there's no woman candidate, but it should also look at the bigger campaigns and the political parties, and women are increasingly becoming a very vocal voice and a voice that cannot be ignored in Sri Lanka.
All right, that's good to hear. Ms. Fonseca, thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.